Usually, when we try to measure the success of a country, we tend to look at very specific, tangible things.
Right, like economic data or something.
Exactly. We look at GDP growth over a financial quarter or the strength of their exports, maybe the polished marble of their presidential palaces.
Or those grand political speeches and military parades rolling through the Capitol.
Yeah, the shiny new infrastructure plans. I mean,
Yeah.
we've built all these elaborate metrics designed to tell us if a state is functioning properly, right? If it's projecting strength.
We rely on them
Yeah,
completely.
I do. But what if the only metric that actually matters, like the true ultimate test of any political system, is whether its own youth will risk falling from the sky just to escape it?
It is an incredibly stark image,
Hmm.
and it really just completely upends how we traditionally think about geopolitics.
It really does. Welcome to today's deep dive. I'm so glad you're joining us.
Happy to be here diving into this one.
Yeah, so today we are unpacking a highly charged, deeply thought-provoking essay. It's titled, When the Young Would Rather Die Than Stay.
Which is a heavy title, but it absolutely fits the material.
It does. Our mission here for you today is to examine the author's really complex, layered argument that global migration crises are not just random humanitarian tragedies.
Or simple bureaucratic border disputes.
Right. The author argues that they are massive, flashing indictments of both local political failure and Western foreign policy.
It's a huge claim.
It is. And let's unpack this, because the author starts with a premise that just stops you in your tracks. Basically, fleeing youth is a damning verdict on a state.
It's the ultimate failure.
Yeah, the essay asks you to forget the speeches and the flags and instead look at Kabul airport in August of 2021.
Oh man, those images.
We all remember those visceral, terrifying images. Desperate men literally clinging to the outside of an American C-17 military aircraft as it taxied down the runway.
It's hard to even comprehend the desperation there.
Right, because logically, they had to know they couldn't hold on once that plane reached altitude.
They had to know.
But the author points out that the physics of falling from the sky seemed preferable to remaining under the political order that was taking shape on the ground below them.
And the author builds a litany of these extreme examples to prove that Kabul wasn't an anomaly. It's a pattern.
A repeating pattern, yeah.
Right. Look at Ceuta, for instance. The Spanish enclave located in North Africa. It serves as this highly fortified physical manifestation of the European border sitting right on the African continent.
I remember reading about that.
Yeah, and the text describes thousands surging toward that border. They're swimming around breakwaters, they're climbing massive fences, knowing perfectly well that European authorities would be hostile to them.
But they do it anyway.
Exactly. The calculation they are making is that European hostility is still far more promising than staying home.
Wow. And the author also brings up the harrowing journey of Somali migrants, right?
Yes. And, this isn't just a matter of someone overstaying a tourist visa. This involves crossing deadly expanses of the Sahara Desert.
Which is basically a death sentence on its own.
It often is. And it involves consciously and willingly entering Libya. The author describes Libya as a failed state, operating as a marketplace of extortion, forced labor, and torture.
I want to pause on that mechanism for a second, because that is really where the true horror of this argument lies.
It's chilling.
Entering a marketplace of torture voluntarily. I mean, you know the risks. You might be held for ransom or much worse.
Yeah, you know what's coming.
But you choose to enter that meat grinder because the alternative, just staying in your home country, is somehow deemed even worse.
And that is the tragic calculus the author wants us to focus on.
Right. It's like a devastating Yelp review for a country. Think about it. When a criminal smuggler is deemed more trustworthy than the official government, the state has fundamentally failed.
That's exactly it. And after surviving Libya, if they do survive, these migrants are boarding flimsy, overcrowded rubber boats to drift across the Mediterranean Sea.
Just hoping they get picked up.
Yeah, or trying to navigate further bottlenecks like Calais in northern France, enduring freezing camps just for a chance to cross the English Channel.
It's just relentless.
It is. And the author's core point is that politicians and the media often mislabel this whole phenomenon. They frame it through a lens of simple economic opportunism.
Oh, like they're just looking for a better paycheck.
Exactly.
Oh.
Or, as the text specifically calls it, wanderlust, as if these are ambitious backpackers seeking a change of scenery.
Wanderlust. Seriously.
Right. The author vehemently insists this is not wanderlust. It is an indictment of the state they're leaving behind.
To put this in perspective, the author isn't just saying these governments are unpopular. It's more like a pressure cooker scenario.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, like the state demands total obedience, sealing the lid tight, but it offers zero economic relief or personal freedom, which turns up the fire.
Right, the heat keeps rising.
And eventually, the pressure becomes so immense that the steam has to find the path of least resistance. And in this case, that path is betting your life on a criminal smuggler.
Because the state's primary function, like its entire reason for existing in political theory, is to provide security and order for its citizens.
Basic security, yeah.
Right. So when the deadly waters of the Mediterranean appear kinder and more reliable than the local police force or the domestic economy, the social contract hasn't just frayed, it is disintegrated entirely.
It's just gone.
The author is really asking us to look deeply at this mindset, where drowning is judged by these migrants as a reasonable price to pay for the mere possibility of dignity.
Just the possibility, not even a guarantee.
Exactly. It's not a guarantee of a high-paying job or a suburban house. It is just a desperate bid for the possibility of dignity.
That phrase, the possibility of dignity, it really establishes the almost incomprehensible lengths people will go to.
It really frames the whole crisis.
But looking at this, we have to ask the next logical question, right? What is the actual mechanism driving this? What exactly is pushing them onto these rubber boats in the first place?
The domestic drivers.
Yeah. The text is brutal in its critique of local governance, focusing on a broad geographic swath, Muslim-majority countries across North Africa, the Middle East, the Horn of Africa, and South Asia.
But there is a crucial distinction there.
Very crucial. The author makes a sharp, explicit point that Islam itself is absolutely not the cause of this exodus.
The text is unambiguous on that point. Identifying these as Muslim-majority countries does not make religion the culprit. It makes political failure the subject.
Political failure.
Right. The author argues that the regimes in these regions, whether they are secular military dictatorships or monarchies, have offered their youth what the text calls a rotten bargain.
A rotten bargain. Let's break down the pillars of this bargain, because the essay doesn't just throw out like generalized complaints. It lists very specific, systemic failures.
It's very methodical about it.
Yeah, it outlines a four-part failure: obedience without opportunity, education without employment, patriotism without citizenship, and religion without justice.
Each of those pairings represents a profound contradiction that breeds a very specific kind of despair.
Absolutely.
Let's look at the mechanics of education without employment, for example. You have generations of young people who are told to study hard, right, to get their university degrees.
They do everything they're supposed to do.
They hold up their end of the bargain. But when they graduate, they find that the economy is entirely captured by cronyism.
Oh.
Jobs aren't distributed based on merit or that degree you just earned. They are distributed through patronage.
So it's all about who you know.
Exactly. If you aren't related to a government minister or you can't pay a massive bribe, your degree is essentially a worthless piece of paper.
That's heartbreaking.
The psychological toll of that, of being promised a future that is then systematically denied to you by your own leaders, is devastating.
I can't even imagine.
It creates what sociologists call waithood, where youth are just sitting in cafes for a decade, just waiting for their adult lives to begin.
Wow, waithood. The text literally says these young people are told to be patient while ruling families steal decades.
Steal decades?
Yeah, and they don't just mean stealing oil wealth or tax revenue. They are stealing decades of human time and potential.
Which is arguably much worse.
And they are told to respect state institutions, but they quickly realize those institutions exist only to protect generals, monarchs, oligarchs, and the secret police.
It's entirely self-serving.
Right. And then they are subjected to patriotism without citizenship, meaning they are expected to wave the flag and love the state, but they are treated as subjects to be managed, not actual citizens with rights.
They are given every single reason to leave.
Every reason. But wait, I struggle with this a bit, and I think a lot of listeners might too. Well, if these regimes are actively giving their youth every reason to leave, and local dictators are creating this rotten bargain, why does the author suggest the world pretends to be shocked when they actually do leave?
What's fascinating here is how the author synthesizes the hypocrisy of the international community's reaction.
Hypocrisy? How so?
Well, this mass exodus of youth from these regions is not some inexplicable mystery, right?
Yeah.
It is entirely predictable. It is the basic physics of a failed society.
Cause and effect.
Exactly. Yet the author notes with deep cynicism that when these young people actually do leave and show up at the borders of wealthier nations, the international community feigns total astonishment.
Like they never saw it coming.
Right. They react as if this is some sudden natural disaster like an earthquake or a tsunami, rather than the logical, mathematical conclusion of decades of bad governance.
Okay, I see that. But how does the author bridge the gap to blaming the West? I mean, if a Western country funded a dictator 40 years ago for oil stability during the Cold War, does the text really argue that the current generation in that Western country is obligated to take in unlimited migrants today?
It's a fair question.
Because where does the text draw the line on historical debt?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the author doesn't actually demand unlimited migration as payment for historical debt.
Oh, really?
No. In fact, the text explicitly concedes that Europe, and by extension the United States, has every right to control its borders.
Okay, that's a massive caveat.
It is. The author acknowledges that a sovereign nation does not have to accept everyone who arrives, and that a failed foreign government cannot simply export its social crisis abroad and expect another society to absorb that crisis without limit.
So border control is okay?
Yes. The demand for secure borders is recognized in the text as a completely legitimate political stance.
Okay, so the author is giving the destination countries that point. Borders are legitimate, sovereignty is real. But then the text pivots, right?
Hard pivot.
It delivers this fierce critique of what it calls Western sanctimonious amnesia. So the text is arguing that you can absolutely believe in the necessity of secure borders, but you aren't allowed to ignore your own foreign policy's role in creating the crowds at those borders.
Exactly. The author's argument is essentially, you can control your borders, but you are not allowed to pretend you have no idea why the people are at your border in the first place.
The amnesia part.
Right. The text presents a historical ledger detailing how the United States and European powers have spent generations actively shaping and often destabilizing the political landscapes of the exact regions these migrants are fleeing.
And the essay explains the mechanism behind this. It's not just some vague accusation of colonialism.
No, it's very specific.
The text details Western powers invading, bombing, financing coups, arming local militias, protecting dictators, and heavily funding the internal security states of these regimes.
By arming a local dictator to keep oil prices stable, or to maintain a favorable geopolitical alliance. Western foreign policy effectively eliminated any democratic avenue for the youth in those countries to change their own governments.
So they couldn't vote them out if they tried.
Exactly. When peaceful political change becomes impossible because the local secret police are funded and trained by Western intelligence agencies, physical escape becomes the only remaining lever of political agency the youth have left.
That's so bleak.
The author points out the massive hypocrisy here. Western powers publicly champion freedom and democracy in their speeches at the UN, while privately embracing and funding torturers and despots.
Because those despots provided cheap oil and arms contracts.
Yes, and just general obedience to Western interests.
So to clarify this tension for the listener, the text is saying you can absolutely believe in the necessity of secure borders to protect your own society, but you cannot separate the crowds at those borders from your own foreign policy decisions over the last 50 years.
You can't have it both ways.
Right. You can't spend half a century funding the secret police of a foreign dictator to secure your energy supply and then act baffled when the citizens brutalized by those same secret police show up on your shores seeking asylum.
The politicians in the destination countries point at the refugees produced by these very arrangements and demand to know why they are coming.
Acting shocked.
Right, but the author insists that these politicians know exactly why. They simply prefer to focus on the final scene of the story rather than acknowledging the full narrative that their own governments helped write.
The final scene. That brings us to one of the most analytical and provocative parts of the essay, which is the critique of modern political propaganda.
It's a very sharp critique.
The author argues that certain political factions, particularly on the far right, are actively manipulating this crisis by exclusively focusing on that final scene, stripping away all the historical mechanisms we just discussed.
The final scene, as defined by the text, is the crowded boat bobbing in the Mediterranean.
Or the breached chain-link fence at Ceuta.
Exactly. It is the mass of young, brown, and Muslim men standing at a border crossing. The author argues that for nationalist political movements, these decontextualized images are an absolute gift.
A gift. Wow.
Because if you only show the final scene, all the preceding history can be deleted.
You just delete the proxy wars. You delete the colonial borders that were drawn arbitrarily by European diplomats a century ago.
You delete the foreign intervention.
Yeah, the billions in arms sales, the economic extraction of resources. You strip all that nuance and causality away until only one thing is left.
And the author says that one thing is encapsulated in a single, electrifying, highly weaponized word.
Invasion.
Invasion. The essay spends significant time deconstructing the linguistics of that specific word.
It's a heavy word.
It is. The author argues that invasion is not just an innocent descriptive noun used by commentators. It is a calculated piece of sociolinguistic propaganda designed to achieve a specific domestic policy outcome.
Because it completely changes the identity of the person on the boat.
Exactly.
The author explains that it turns a terrified, malnourished 19-year-old who is basically just the product of total political collapse into an advancing enemy combatant.
An invasion implies a unified military command structure with an intent to conquer territory.
It implies soldiers, not a group of desperate teenagers trying not to drown in the dark.
And that linguistic shift changes the legal and moral framework of the response.
How so?
Well, when you view someone as a desperate migrant, the response involves border patrol, asylum hearings, and humanitarian aid.
Right.
But when you label them an invading soldier, empathy evaporates. You don't send social workers to an invasion, you send the military.
You militarize a humanitarian failure.
Exactly. It turns despair into aggression in the minds of the public.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The author doesn't take the easy way out here. They don't just blindly dismiss the concerns of the citizens in these destination countries.
No, the text is very grounded in reality on this point.
Yeah, the text actually admits, with stark realism, that images of mass migration are genuinely unsettling to the communities receiving them.
The author acknowledges that a sudden influx of large groups of young men crossing borders does frighten people, and that fear disrupts social cohesion.
It's a real disruption.
It is. Crucially, the text argues that governments or activists who simply dismiss, mock, or ignore that public fear are acting foolishly.
You can't just tell your citizens, don't believe your lying eyes, there's nothing to worry about here.
No, because the strain on local resources is real.
The fear of rapid cultural shift is real. But the author is saying that acknowledging the need for border control doesn't mean you have to surrender to historical illiteracy.
You can validate the domestic anxiety without buying into the invasion propaganda.
Right.
The author's conclusion on this dynamic is that the far right wants a very specific, sanitized version of reality. They want the boat on the evening news, but without the geopolitical war that launched it.
They want the frightening image of the migrant, but without acknowledging the Western-backed dictator who drove them out.
Exactly. They want to campaign on the border crisis, but without ever taking responsibility for the foreign policy that helped create it.
They want the symptom without ever discussing the disease.
That's a great way to put it.
But if the invasion framing is just a smokescreen to avoid historical guilt, we have to ask who is actually holding the bag for this crisis.
Who is really to blame?
Yeah. Is the West entirely to blame, or did the local dictators get a pass? This brings us to the author's final verdict on where the ultimate blame lies.
And the author is careful to balance the scales here by insisting on shared blame.
Okay.
The text makes it very clear that local rulers in the Middle East, North Africa, and beyond are not blameless puppets without agency.
They aren't just innocent bystanders.
Not at all. They
Right.
cannot just point at the West and say, the CIA made us do it. The author states that many of these local leaders have robbed, imprisoned, and brutalized their own societies with absolute self-serving enthusiasm.
They bear enormous direct responsibility for the despair of their youth.
Yeah.
So it's a co-authored tragedy. The local leaders built the pressure cooker, but the Western governments armed them, defended them in international forums, and bought their oil, basically keeping the lid tightly screwed on.
That's the dynamic.
And because of that, the author argues Western nations cannot suddenly pose as completely innocent victims when the consequences of that 50-year arrangement finally arrive at the beaches of Lampedusa or the fences of Calais.
But underneath all the geopolitical blame game, the author reserves the deepest condemnation for the overarching system itself.
The whole system.
Right. The text closes with this powerful, almost philosophical argument. The deepest shame belongs to a global political system that has made escape the highest possible ambition for an entire generation of young people.
So what does this all mean? When we strip away the partisan politics, the debates over asylum quotas, and the historical finger-pointing, what is the core takeaway the author wants us to hold on to?
It comes down to a redefinition.
Right. It seems to come down to fundamentally redefining what we are looking at when we see these images on the news. The author is demanding that we stop seeing the boats as an invasion and start seeing them as evidence.
And this raises an important question about the fundamental resilience of a nation-state.
How so?
Well, the text makes a profound assertion at the very end. It posits that a country can survive an astonishing amount of hardship.
Like what?
It can survive crippling economic sanctions. It can survive decades of crushing poverty. It can even survive the physical, infrastructural destruction of a war.
Right. Countries rebuild after wars all the time.
Exactly. But the one thing it cannot survive indefinitely is the loss of faith of an entire generation.
The loss of faith of an entire generation, that is heavy.
It really is.
It means that when the youth universally decide that the project of your country is over, it's just over. The government just hasn't realized it yet.
The boats are the physical manifestation of that lost faith.
Yeah. They are the undeniable evidence that the social contract hasn't just been temporarily broken, it has been permanently abandoned.
It challenges the listener to recognize that what we are witnessing is not just a border management issue. It's a profound geopolitical shift driven by a catastrophic deficit of hope.
A deficit of hope. This has been a heavy, complex journey today.
It definitely has.
And for you listening, regardless of where you personally stand on border walls, immigration policy, or foreign aid, this essay challenges you to look past the breaking news footage.
Look past the sound bites.
Exactly. The next time you see those crowded rubber boats or endless lines of people at a border on your screen, the text asks you to ask the uncomfortable questions about the decades of global policy, the backroom intelligence deals, and the local corruption that ultimately pushed those boats into the water in the first place.
It demands historical literacy in an era where quick sound bites and fear-mongering are just so much easier to digest.
It demands we look at the full, complicated story, not just the terrifying final scene. And we want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over, building directly on the author's premise.
Something to really think about.
Yeah. The text emphasizes that a country cannot survive the loss of faith of an entire generation. But if this massive, unprecedented hope drain continues, what actually happens to the societies left behind?
Right. Who is left?
Think about it. If the most resilient, the most ambitious, the bravest, and the most desperate young people are the ones who manage to scrape together the money and risk death to leave, who remains to rebuild these failing states?
It's a terrifying question.
If all the youthful energy, anger, and drive for change is systematically exported on smuggler boats, will this dynamic eventually reshape the global map entirely in the decades to come?
Are we looking at the permanent collapse of entire regions?
Something to think about the next time you see the news. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
We'll see you next time.